Shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? Give the call to the Shadow Treasurer.
Prime Minister, after 2.5 years of this Albanese Labor government, Australians have seen their standard of living fall off a cliff, the biggest reduction since records began in the 50s. We've been in a household recession for a record 6 consecutive quarters. This is worse for households than Keating's recession we had to have and the disastrous Whitlam government. This week, Prime Minister, is taking our country in the wrong direction. How can Australian families afford another 3 years of Labor?
Give the call to the Prime Minister. Order.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I'll ignore the rhetoric in that question from the Shadow Treasurer. But we came to office, of course, in 2022 with a number of challenges that we were facing. Global economic uncertainty was there, a worldwide surge in inflation and energy prices.
Order.
Inflation, when we came to office, had a 6 in front of it and was rising. Productivity was going backwards. Wages were going backwards in real wages. And that was a deliberate design, of course, from the former government. And, of course, interest rates began to rise on the former government's watch as well. When it came to energy prices, of course, as well, we know that the person who asked the question hid the fact that there was a considerable increase on the way.
Order.
We had tape and skills hollowed out. We had housing shortages. We had aged care near breaking point, a crisis in aged care. We held bulk billing degraded. Now, these are the challenges that we've had to face, the mess that we've worked to clean up. So now, instead of a 6 in front of it and rising, inflation has a 2 in front of it and is falling. Now we have 1 million jobs have been created on our watch. The gender pay gap is now at a record low. We have back-to-back budget surpluses for the first time in nearly 2 decades. Instead of a $78 billion deficit that was projected by those opposite, we delivered a $22 billion surplus, followed by a $15 billion surplus as well, making sure that we made a difference in putting that downward pressure on inflation. And at the same time, we had cost of living relief, all of which was opposed by those opposite, whether it be energy bill relief, cheaper medicines, free TAFE, cheaper childcare, or a tax cut for every Australian taxpayer. They were all opposed by those opposite, all opposed. So certainly things, if they had have had their way, this reckless and arrogant opposition, things would have been worse. Things would have.
Order.
People would have been in a much more difficult position if they didn't have their wages going up, their costs going down and inflation coming back to where it should be.
The member for Macarthur will just have a quiet question time. Give the call to the honourable member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How is the Albanese Labor government working to get more Australians into housing, and what obstacles stand in the way?
The call to the Minister for Housing and the Minister for Homelessness.
Thanks so much, Speaker. And I really want to thank the member for Bennelong for this question. He is an absolutely staunch advocate for housing in his community, and he's got runs on the board, Speaker. While the member for Bennelong was a local councillor, he approved 17,000 new homes in his local area, 11,000 as Mayor, Speaker, and it's fantastic to see him here bringing that advocacy to the national stage. Speaker, today is a good day for aspiring homeowners on lower middle incomes right across the country.
Member for Deakin will cease rejecting.
I'm really pleased to inform the House that our government's Help to Buy bill has just passed the Senate. And I want to acknowledge the work of my predecessor, Minister Collins, who developed up this policy and set the stage for its passage through the parliament. Speaker, this is good policy in a proud Labor tradition. The Help to Buy legislation will help 40,000 low and middle income Australians get into home ownership. We're talking about cleaners, about childcare workers, about nurses, about disability workers, hard-working Australians who are right in the guts of our economy, who we in the Labor Party believe should get the keys to their own home. And that's what Help to Buy will do. Now, we appreciate the support of those who have voted in favour of this bill, including the Australian Greens. I've had a little bit of constructive criticism to offer the Greens in recent days, Speaker. But let's all agree, Speaker, at least the Greens are showing a modicum of interest in housing policy in this country. Because the people who have really tapped out of this debate, the people who have gone completely missing, are those opposite. We see barely a flicker of interest from those opposite in housing policy. Now, this is not a new approach, Speaker, because I want the parliament to remember that for the almost decade that those opposite were in power, for most of that time they didn't even have a Commonwealth Housing Minister. Speaker, that's how much they had retreated from this discussion. Now, we have made a number of attempts to brief the Shadow Housing Minister on the policy offerings that we've brought before this parliament. It's not that he can't find the time to come to the briefing, Speaker. He won't even respond to our requests for a discussion. Now, Speaker, those opposite—
The minister's going to pause. The member for Deakin, I thought, was turning the corner, so we're just going to cease interjecting. Order. The minister doesn't need to comment when I'm addressing the House. And that concludes now. Otherwise, I'll sit her down. So the member for Deakin was interjecting on you, so I was trying to bring the House to order so that we can hear your answer. You have the call.
Thank you, Speaker. Now, unfortunately, those opposite have blocked every initiative that we have brought forward to address the issues that Australians are experiencing with housing. But I'm particularly upset about what has happened with Help to Buy, Speaker, because the Coalition have said for a long time that they care about home ownership. But just an hour ago in the Senate, they came forward and voted against tens of thousands of cleaners, carers and nurses and teachers not being able to own their own home. Speaker, there's going to be a really clear choice at the next election on housing between a reckless, arrogant opposition of pessimism and a party of progress that's making a real difference to Australians' housing opportunities.
The call to the honourable member for Hume.
Prime Minister, Deloitte Access Economics is forecasting the worst budget collapse in 50 years outside the pandemic. Last week, the Treasurer announced that Labor would raid the Future Fund to top up Labor's reckless spending. This weak Albanese Labor government is taking our country in the wrong direction. How can Australians possibly afford another 3 years of Labor?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Shadow Treasurer for his rhetoric and for his and for
just being you.
Treasurer will cease interjecting.
And as the Treasurer has indicated, for just being a delight for the Treasurer to have a shadow, because
Order.
We do have a plan. Those opposite had a plan to take wages backwards. That was a key feature of their economic architecture. We have a plan for getting wages up. Increases, 3 of them, for people on the minimum wage. Remember back to the election campaign, Mr Speaker, when I took out that $1 coin and argued that a $1 coin, a $1 increase per hour was something that we would support if the Fair Work Commission chose to do so. And those opposite said it would wreck the economy. The sky would fall in if that occurred. The reckless arrogance from those opposite, Mr Speaker. And then, of course, what happens with workers isn't just their wages, but there's a range of ways in which we've put them up. Whether it be the 10% increase that early educators will get on December 1, not long away now, from next week. The increase in aged care workers to make sure that the system could continue to function. The lowest gender pay gap on record as a direct result of the fact that we have targeted feminised industries to give, not just our thanks to those people who got us through the pandemic, but a proper, decent wages and decent conditions. And then there's people who I've met who benefited directly from same job, same pay, including a miner who benefited by $34,000, another by $27,000, meaning they're earning exactly the same as the people they're working side by side. But it's not just that, Mr Speaker. As well as that, they're getting to keep more of what they earn, because we changed the tax cuts to make sure that every taxpayer, not just some, got a tax cut, all 13.6 million of them. In addition to that, we're bringing costs down, cheaper medicines, but more bulk billing, energy rebates, cheaper childcare, all of that opposed by those opposite. Inflation had a 6 in front of it, now it has a 2 in front of it and is going down. And on top of that, we have delivered back-to-back budget services, something those opposite couldn't possibly recognise.
The call to the member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government working to comprehensively address housing issues in our country? And has there been any opposition to this?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Corangamite for her question, and indeed we have a comprehensive plan, our Homes for Australia plan, $32 billion, about increased supply of social and affordable housing, about increased support for people who are renting with increased rental assistance on the last 2 budgets. But in addition to that, of course, we want more Australians to own their own home. We have a plan to build 1.2 million homes by the end of the decade. We're training more tradies, we're funding more infrastructure and we're delivering more social housing. And we are seeing results. We have helped 120,000 people into home ownership sooner, twice as many as occurred under the former government. And this week, 2 of our most important measures will be voted on in the Senate. Just before Help to Buy passed the Senate with the support of everyone except for the Coalition and One Nation. We think this will help 40,000 Australians on low incomes to buy their first home, getting more affordable rentals on the market. We would have helped those 40,000 Australians a year ago if those opposite weren't standing in the way. And now they have promised to get rid of it if they are elected to office. So first they stood in the way, now they say they'll take it away. That's their approach to increased home ownership. Now, Australians could have had been in those homes right now, but they just said no, 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 like a broken record. The Labor government that I'm proud to lead is turning promises into progress, delivering for every generation and delivering for every Australian. Those opposite just want to get in the way. I'll give you the big tip for those interjecting. Being reckless builds nothing. Being arrogant gets you nowhere. My government is determined to get things done. Those opposite, on the very day that the Senate has passed Help to Buy, are promising to take it away. They not only don't want to progress if they ever occupy the Treasury benches, what they want to do is to actually take Australia backwards and undo progress which is made, even though we know that shared equity schemes have been successful in states, in other governments as well overseas, and it's based upon a program that has operated effectively in Western Australia for many, many decades.
Before I call the member for Brisbane, the member for Deakin needs to cease interjecting because he's now on a warning. I want to make sure he stays for question time, so he can work with me on that to make sure he remains, or if he wants to interject, he won't remain. Give the call to the honourable member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, why are climate emissions higher under your government than when Scott Morrison left office?
Order. Members on my left. The member for Fairfax is warned. The member for Brisbane is entitled to ask his questions, just like anyone else in the chamber, and he's going to be heard in silence. So no commentary for any questions when they're asked, no matter where you sit in the chamber. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. The answer to the honourable member's question is they're not, and there'll be further evidence of that this week, Mr Speaker, when we release the latest forecasts and projections and the quarterly inventory, as well as the annual climate change statement, which is world's best practice when it comes to accountability on climate change, Mr Speaker. Our Climate Change Act institutes procedures both for setting targets and for reporting progress on targets, and we'll see that later this week. And I'll tell you what does bring emissions down. It's governments implementing policies to see the right rollout of renewable energy, cheap and clean across our country, to bring emissions down in transport, as the Minister for Transport and I have done, with zero support from those opposite, but legislated through the parliament, because transport, working with industry and electricity and agriculture, is how you get emissions down in a meaningful sense. A government actually setting a clear policy agenda from the beginning, set by the Climate Change Act, supported by the Safeguards reforms, supported by the new vehicle efficiency standards, supported by our capacity investment scheme, all of which has been done by this government, all of which has been opposed by the opposition, who wants to stop all that while they wait for their nuclear fantasy to become a reality.
Before I call the member for McNamara, I'm pleased to welcome a delegation from the Solomon Islands, led by the Honourable Jimson Tanangara, the Minister for Police, National Security and Correctional Services, and the Honourable Kleze Roha, the Minister for Justice and Legal Affairs. I notice we have students from Carey Baptist College in the electorate from Burt, and also the winner of this year's My First Speech competition for Year 12, Olivia Rose Bradshaw. And I'm very pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today are the many participants of Kids in the House who are here today with their parents and representatives from JDRF, a leading supporter of type 1 diabetes research in the world. Welcome to you all. And on indulgence, the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. It was absolutely delightful to welcome these fine young Australians from the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation in the Prime Minister's courtyard earlier today, and their parents, and also those people from the foundation. These young Australians are an inspiration. I've been meeting with them since it was instituted in 20 years ago, when we instituted a process in this parliament whereby they would come here, meet with their local members, either here or in their electorate, and educate us about the experience that they have in dealing with diabetes and the courage that they show. And every one of them never tells you a hardship story. They're always upbeat. It's always a pleasure to meet with them, and I'm very proud that my government announced $50 million in funding for the foundation today to coincide with that. It's an important research area, and I know from at least one member of my staff who has been in that situation and is dealing with it and leading a very fulfilling life as well. So I did want to join with the Speaker in welcoming particularly the young Australians, but also their parents and carers and others who are here today.
Indulgence, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I join with the Prime Minister in welcoming all of those participants in the JDRF program who are in the House today. And as the Prime Minister says, we've been meeting with people, particularly children affected by type 1 diabetes, for many, many years in this place. I want to give a big shout-out to Alyssa, her mum Linda from my electorate. I saw them on the plane on the way down on Monday, and we have had, as members of parliament, engagement with young advocates, as they refer to themselves, who are really telling us about what it is to live with type 1 diabetes and what it means for their parents, the uncertainty, particularly as kids get older, and the complications of life and sport and being away from home, wanting to go to parties, travel, etc., etc. And I just encourage all Australians to jump on the website to understand the differences between type 1 diabetes and type 2 and understand the real concern that every Australian should have with making sure that we can find a cure for type 1 diabetes. And I just say thank you very much to everyone for being in the House today. We welcomed and supported and announced our commitment to the $50 million worth of funding as well. And one of the greatest pleasures I had as Health Minister was to put a lot of money into medical research for type 1 diabetes, because we absolutely must work with all of the leading collaborators around the world, the best researchers, to make sure that we can find that cure to change the lives for those young people in the House today, in Australia and right across the world.
Call to the honourable member for McNamara.
Thank you very much, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government investing in building more homes and making housing more affordable for Australians, and what obstacles are standing in the way?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Speaker. The member for McNamara is a real champion for renters and first home buyers in his beautiful, vibrant part of Melbourne. I thank him for the question. Look, housing is one of the defining challenges in our economy. It's one of the substantial pressures on people right now, and that's why it's a big priority of the government to address this challenge. And when we came to office, as the COVID report laid bare, the housing construction pipeline was a mess. In the report that the Health Minister and I released, it made really clear that home builder was pulling demand forward and adding to inflation while supply chains weren't up to scratch. And partly because of that and partly because of other pressures, Mr Speaker, we just don't have enough homes in our communities, and that's putting pressure on costs and it's putting pressure on those communities. Now, rents have been one of the biggest drivers of inflation, but they'd be higher still were it not for the two substantial increases in rent assistance that we have delivered as a government. Now, Mr Speaker, these challenges in the housing market didn't just pop up in May of 2022, and they'll take time to sort out as well. But we are doing our bit as a government. We are investing more in housing than any government ever has, more than 10 times what those opposite invested in almost 10 years, Mr Speaker. And this is a tribute to Ministers O'Neill and to Minister Collins, the Prime Minister and others, this commitment that we have to investment in housing. Now, in our first budget, we had the Housing Australia Future Fund, Help to Buy and the Housing Accord. In our second budget, tax breaks for build-to-rent. Our third budget, tackling infrastructure bottlenecks. In the last two budgets, those increases to rent assistance, big investments in skills in every opportunity. And that's because we've got an ambitious target to build 1.2 million homes in 5 years. It will be hard, but we can get there if everyone does their bit, and we are doing our bit. The states need to do their bit, the local governments, the peak groups, the builders, the investors, and there's a role for the Senate as well, Mr Speaker, as we know this week, and we call on the senators to pass our build-to-rent changes this week. Now, if those opposite really cared about housing and cost of living, they'd support this investment. But we know that they're a risk to housing because we know their record. They made a mess of the pipeline, they voted against more homes, and they cut investment in housing at the worst possible time. And we know from their behaviour today and in the Senate this week, Mr Speaker, that the biggest risk to housing and the biggest risk to household budgets is a coalition government. This side of the House is getting inflation down and wages up. We are strengthening Medicare and building more homes, and we welcome the progress made in the Senate this week in that light.
Call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister promised before the last election that Australian families will be better off under a Labor government. But under Labor, groceries are harder to buy, rents and mortgages are up and energy is more expensive every month. Now, with Labor's attempt to raid the nation's piggy bank, the Future Fund, this weak and incompetent government is taking Australia further in the wrong direction looking more like the Whitlam government every day. How can Australian families and businesses possibly afford another 3 years of Labor?
Order. The member for Fremantle is warned. I don't know how many times I have to tell people, but we're going to keep doing it the right way. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, that wasn't the tightest question that I've heard in this place, but I'll do my best, Mr Speaker, and I'm sure that it will be relevant. Because the fact is that when we came to office, real wages were going down and now they're going up. 4 quarters in a row. 4 quarters in a row they have gone up. Not by accident, but by design. Just as they went down by design as a key feature of their economic architecture, under this government, this Labor government, wages are going up deliberately as a result of our designs, our policy, our legislation, whether it be same job, same pay, whether it be specifically dealing with those sectors that were struggling to keep workers, let alone attract workers, such as early childhood education and aged care. And we have made a substantial difference. And in terms of the question that was asked as well about costs and cost of living, the fact is that the measures that we have introduced have all been opposed by those opposite, whether it be cheaper medicines, more bulk billing, energy rebates, cheaper childcare, tax cuts for every single Australian worker and taxpayer. They have all been opposed by those opposite. Now, we know people are under pressure. We know there's more to do. The difference between us and them is that they acknowledge people are under pressure but want it to be worse. Want no support for them, want no cost of living relief, want lower wages and want higher inflation. And those opposite also wouldn't have assisted by producing budget surpluses. How do we know that? Because their projections were there. $78 billion deficit. They produced a budget in March, just 2 months before the election, which showed just red ink forever, no budget surpluses. We have worked hard through the Expenditure Review Committee to make a difference, to bank any of the upward figures or forecasts, but to make a difference. Now, the real question those opposite have to answer is how would any Australian have been better off under them? Would they have been better off with lower wages under them, with more expensive medicines, less bulk billing, fewer houses, less rent assistance, no free take, no HECS debt relief, a privatised NBN? I mean, they have no positive plans whatsoever, just reckless arrogance in their approach to the pressures that Australians are under. We're about acknowledging it, but doing.
We'll hear from the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Social Services. What impacts are the Albanese Labor government's back-to-back increases to the maximum rates of Commonwealth rent assistance having on rents? What alternative approaches are there?
Call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Macquarie for her question. Of course, our government recognises that Australians are doing it tough, with Australia's housing challenges being decades in the making. That is why our government is responding with a $32 billion housing plan, which is building more homes, helping people buy homes and getting more social and affordable homes into the system. As part of this plan, we've acted immediately to deliver significant increases to Commonwealth rent assistance, providing more support to manage rental pressures. We have delivered substantial back-to-back increases to the maximum rates of rent assistance in the first time in more than 30 years. When combined with indexation, this means that our rent assistance has increased by 45% since the Albanese government was elected. Now, importantly, our rent assistance increases have had a positive impact on moderating rents across the board, with the ABS data showing that rents would have been higher without our measures. Now, our increases to rent assistance are making a real difference to people on the ground. Take Debbie from Tasmania, who said that her rent assistance increases was making her rent more affordable as a single pensioner, allowing her to spend less on rent and be better off. Or Belinda, a carer from Seaford in South Australia, who told me that the extra rent assistance had come at a very good time to help her with her rent increases. She said it was making a big difference, along with everything else our government was doing. Now, Speaker, I've been asked about alternative approaches. And while our government is investing in rent assistance to help with cost of living, those opposite have no plan to help with the cost of rent and housing. Of course, those opposite had 10 years in government and made no substantive increase to rent assistance and took no action on housing in this country. And now we have the Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Treasurer declaring that our government's spending on rent assistance is reckless and wasteful spending. Well, I tell you what's reckless and wasteful. It's this Leader of the Opposition who has a plan for $315 billion of cuts. That's cuts to rent assistance and that's cuts to housing. This Leader of the Opposition is a risk to living standards in this country. And when it comes to housing, we are building and they are blocking. Only Labor, and they don't like to hear this, only Labor has a plan to build a better future for this country.
The member for Hume, I'm just going to ask you to cease interjecting. As you are responsible for the MPI proceeding, we're going to make sure that there's no more interjections, because I'm sure the parliament does want the MPI today. And now I'd like to hear from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Last month saw the highest number of Australian business insolvencies of any month on record, with 1,364 businesses going bust. Since this Prime Minister took office, over 25,000 Australian businesses have gone insolvent. Behind every one of those 25,000 businesses is an owner who has gone broke, workers who have lost their jobs. This weak Albanese Labor government is taking our country in the wrong direction. How can Australian families possibly afford another 3 years of Labor?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Well, the facts are just wrong that the Deputy Leader has put forward. Half the level that it was under John Howard's government. And the minutes of the RBA's monetary policy meeting in September, 24th of September, said this: the cumulative level of insolvencies was still below the pre-pandemic trend. Who was in government pre-pandemic? Who was in government during the pre-pandemic? Those opposite. Those opposite.
Order.
So go and have a look. Or the RBA Governor appearing before the House Standing Committee on Economics in August said it's not at historical highs. Said it very clearly.
The Prime Minister is answering the question. He couldn't be more direct with information to members. The Deputy Leader was careful to make sure she was heard in silence. So how about everyone gets a fair go? The Deputy Leader can help the House by ceasing interjecting. The Attorney-General can also add to that cause by ceasing interjecting, so we can listen to the Prime Minister.
I was quoting Michelle Bullock and her appearance before the House Standing Committee on Economics. She said this: in fact, if you look at the trend of insolvencies over time, we're not even back to where we were pre-pandemic trend-wise. Just the RBA Governor. Just the RBA Governor. Just someone fact-checking the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. But I'm asked about the last month, Mr Speaker. Well, I'll tell you what we've been doing in the last month, indeed in the last 2 weeks that this parliament has sat. Free TAFE legislation, opposed by those opposite because apparently you don't value it, which explains why they don't support Medicare, they don't support TAFE, they don't support public schools or public hospitals. fixing HECS indexation for a fair go for young people, the most significant aged care reform in a generation, future made in Australia with production tax credits introduced to make a difference, protecting our children with the social media reforms, delivering for every generation of Australians, older Australians by strengthening aged care, families with more housing and more help to buy a home, students with free TAFE and HECS debt relief, and our children protecting them from the harms of social media. That's what we've done in just this fortnight, Mr Speaker. What did those opposite do? They support privatising the NBN and won't support it staying in public hands. They want to increase migration and won't support the sensible measures put forward.
On my left.
They want to stop free TAFE.
Order.
They want to protect dodgy private education providers when they're not going to fundraisers for them. That's right. And they want to prevent Australians buying homes. Right. Compare the pair, Mr Speaker, because that's what next year Australians will have the opportunity to do. An optimistic government working for Australians to make life easier, or those opposite working every day to make things harder because they think that advantages them.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. We'll hear from the member for Chisholm.
Thank you so much, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. How is the Albanese Labor government providing cost of living relief and building a better and fairer education system, and what's getting in the way?
Call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the champion member for Chisholm for her question. Mr Speaker, tonight the Senate will vote on 3 important education bills. Bills that will make our education system better and fairer, and bills that will provide real cost of living relief for early educators, for students and for 3 million Australians with a student debt. The first of those bills will deliver a 15% pay rise for some of the most important workers in this country and some of the most underpaid, our early educators. As the Prime Minister said, that will start rolling out from next week, just ahead of Christmas. And guess what the Liberal Party has said about a 15% pay rise for some of Australia's lowest paid workers?
Order.
They call that dodgy. The second bill that will be voted on tonight increases funding for our public schools. That will help to turn around the drop in the number of kids finishing high school by tying that funding to real and practical reforms, like phonics checks and catch-up tutoring. And guess what the Liberal Party says about extra funding for public schools and those reforms? They say that is the wrong priority. And, Mr Speaker, the third bill the Senate will debate tonight will provide real cost-of-living help for nursing students, for teaching students, for midwifery students and social work students by providing them with a bit of financial help while they do their prac. And that same bill will wipe $3 billion of student debt for more than 3 million Australians. And, Mr Speaker, if we win the next election, we will cut student debt even more, by 20% for every one of those 3 million Australians. And guess what the Liberal Party think about that? They say that's unfair. They say that would be a terrible thing to do. There's a bit of a pattern here, Mr Speaker. The Liberal Party hate everything that's going to make our education system better and fairer. They attack every bit of help that we're giving Australians with the cost of living. The Liberal Party might not want to give early educators a pay rise, but we do. The Liberal Party may not want us to invest more money in our public schools, but we do. The Liberal Party may not think it's a good idea to provide financial help for teaching students and nursing students, midwifery students and social work students, but we do. And the Liberal Party may not want to reduce the student debt of 3 million Australians across this country, but we absolutely do.
The call to the honourable member for Mallee.
Were they supposed to join in the calls?
The member for Mallee has the call.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Food Bank's 2024 Hunger Report has found 2 million Australian households are experiencing severe food insecurity. This means they skipped meals or ate less because they could not afford enough food, and the situation has deteriorated compared to the 2022 results. This weak Albanese Labor government is taking our country in the wrong direction. How can Australian families and businesses possibly afford another 3 years of Labor?
Call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. Of course, we've been very focused on cost of living pressures that Australians are facing. We understand that people are doing it tough, and we are responding with cheaper medicines, cheaper childcare, and when it comes to supporting those particularly doing it tough, we have had a base rate increase to JobSeeker. We have record increases in Commonwealth rent assistance. We've extended the single parenting payment to children aged 14. And when it comes to food relief, we really appreciate the work that our non-government sector does right across the country. We've actually increased in this budget extra funding to support emergency relief and other important support, financial counselling. I was very proud to deliver, for example, the industry-funded model, something that those opposite couldn't deliver. I was able to deliver the industry-funded financial counselling model, which we now have over $30 million from organisations contributing to. So we will keep looking at all the ways that we can support people with cost of living, whether that's through emergency relief, food relief, but importantly through the cost of living measures, including tax cuts to every single taxpayer, something that those opposite were never going to do.
Give a call to the honourable member for Tangney.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport. How will the Albanese Labor government's historic aged care reforms deliver dignity and quality in aged care?
Give a call to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport.
I thank the member for Tangney for his question and for the way that he never stops fighting for the older people in his electorate. Mr Speaker, the Royal Commission found that previous governments had brought an appalling level of ambivalence and timidity and detachment to their approach to aged care, and that ended with the election of the Albanese government. From day one, we took action. From the very first act of the 47th Parliament was passing aged care reform legislation, beginning the process of putting security and dignity and quality and humanity back into aged care. And because of these reforms, right now there is a registered nurse on site in aged care 99% of the time, or 23.5 hours out of 24 in Australia. Older Australians are receiving an additional 3.9 million minutes of care every single day, 1.7 million of which are delivered by a qualified and registered nurse. There has been statistically significant decreases in the proportion of residents experiencing polypharmacy, antipsychotic medication use, falls that result in major injury, use of physical restraints, significant unplanned weight loss and consecutive unplanned weight loss. And for the first time, the prevalence of one or more pressure injuries is declining over time. We have made aged care more transparent, with star ratings for residential care, empowering older people and their families to make informed decisions. We have increased government investment in residential aged care by 58%, and we've delivered a $15.1 billion pay rise for aged care workers. And the addition of the Dollars to Care program to star ratings profiles holds providers accountable for the way that they spend their budgets. And of course, this week the Parliament passed our historic rights-based aged care bill, the most significant aged care reform in 30 years. And from 1 July 2025, the new Act will create a rights-based person-centred aged care system. The Albanese government will deliver 107,000 packages in the next 2 years, a record number, the largest ever release of home care packages. And here's how the industry has responded. The Council of the Ageing has said that the Act will deliver long-awaited rights for older people that put their voices front and centre. The Older Persons Advocacy Network said this Act will build a safe and high-quality, financially viable aged care sector for generations to come. RSL Life Care said the new Act is a pivotal moment for veterans and seniors in Australia, ensuring the care we provide not only meets expectations but empowers individuals to live with greater choice. Catholic Health welcomed the seminal reform which will help deliver quality and sustainable aged care for all Australians.
Call to the honourable member for McKellar.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. My community of McKellar is served by the only public-private partnership hospital in New South Wales. Healthscope, which runs the Northern Beaches Hospital, has recently terminated the contracts of the private health insurers who they believe are failing to adequately reimburse patients for their care. This means my constituents will either have to pay significantly more for their private care or travel to other hospitals. Will the government support the AMA's call for a private health system authority to resolve such disputes and ensure my community is not left in the lurch and paying big bucks for their health care? Thanks.
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker. Can I first of all add my welcome to the Blue Army, the kids in the house, particularly to Theo and his mum Julie from the western suburbs in Adelaide. Theo's a terrific soccer player. He plays midfield right. He played for the blue team this morning against the parliamentarians. It pains me to say, Mr Speaker, some of our parliamentary colleagues are particularly dirty players. But still, the kids won, Mr Speaker. The kids won, and so they deserve to win. So they deserve to win. But the member asked a very important question, and I want to give a little bit of background to what is a situation I know is concerning a number of members of the insurance funds that she mentions. We have a mixed system here in Australia, as the member knows, where Medicare sits alongside a private system with private hospitals funded in large part by private health insurers. They conduct about 70% of surgery in this country and a range of other very important services. And that system essentially functions through contracts negotiated between the insurers and the hospitals on the other hand. And that commercial tension has for a long time delivered competition and efficiency, which ultimately has been to the benefit of patients. But like many sectors, this sector has suffered a price shock from COVID, and there are a range of other changes happening, a shift away from overnight stays to more day surgery, which impacts the business model of many hospitals and other things as well. As a result, I asked the Secretary of the Department to conduct a health check on this sector. Insurers, private hospital operators, the AMA and patient groups were part of that. It was very constructive. I've published a version of that health check, and I've asked the Secretary to keep that forum going, and it will discuss some short-term options for reform of this sector very soon, as well as some long-term ideas that include the AMA idea, which they've been touting really for some time now, a different regulatory system. In the meantime, though, can I say this, that both these two companies, Bupa and Healthscope, are large multinational companies that receive either directly or indirectly billions of dollars in taxpayer support through the insurance rebate and other means, as well as hard-earned money from fund members as well. Now, they've got their commercial interests, but I make the point again that given that level of support and the privilege of operating as part of Australia's healthcare system, I expect them to put patients first. Now, they've given 90 days' notice, Healthscope, of an intention not to be part of Bupa's operations. They need to get back to the table. They need to fix this, because the ultimate losers are going to be members of those funds who would be left having to pay vast out-of-pocket expenses. So I say again, get back to the table and fix this.
The call to the member for Swan.
My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government's responsible budget management helping in the fight against inflation and easing the cost of living? How does this compare to other approaches?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Speaker, and thanks to the member for Swan for her question, but also for the really quite remarkable representation she provides her community here in this place. Now, as the Prime Minister has pointed out a couple of times today, Mr Speaker, when we came to office, Australians were going backwards due to a combination of higher and rising inflation and falling real wages, and we had inherited huge deficits and $1 trillion of Liberal debt, and we've been working hard to clean up the mess. Inflation has more than halved. Real wages are growing again. We've recorded 2 consecutive surpluses for the first time in almost 2 decades. The Governor of the Reserve Bank said that that's helping in the fight against inflation. And we've also shaved off $150 billion in Liberal debt. But we know that people are still under pressure, and we know that the pressure on the national budget is intensifying rather than easing. And these are the points made by the Deloitte report, which was released overnight, which talked about the impact of a slowing Chinese economy, for example, or a weakening in our labour market, and what that means for the budget, Mr Speaker. But it remains the case. It remains the case, Mr Speaker, that this government has overseen the biggest positive turnaround in the budget in a parliamentary term in Australian history, Mr Speaker. We have turned 2 big Liberal deficits into 2 big Labor surpluses, and that is a powerful demonstration of our responsible economic management, Mr Speaker. And that's why Deloitte made 2 points. The first point Deloitte made was they acknowledged our fiscal discipline and said we deserve credit for banking upward revisions to revenue. And they also said, Mr Speaker, in their report that the soft landing that we are seeking is looking likely in our economy. Those are 2 points that Deloitte made in their report, Mr Speaker. Now, we have made it really clear that there are pressures on the budget that we are working in a responsible and methodical way to deal with. And I wanted to give those opposite who are chirping away an example of these pressures on the budget. When the mid-year budget update is released in December, Mr Speaker, one of the biggest increases in spending will be for veterans. It will be for veterans. And that's because of the work that we have done to make sure that veterans are getting their claims processed and getting the support that they need and deserve after a lifetime of service, Mr Speaker. And so what you'll see in the MyUFO is a big increase in funding for veterans' support. Now, those opposite describe looking after veterans as wasteful spending. They think it's wasteful spending. And this shows us once again what a risk they are to the household budgets of people right around this country. We are increasing support for veterans. That will be one of the reasons why there's a deterioration in the budget. Those opposite don't support it, and that shows again what a risk they are to the budget and to household budgets right around Australia.
The member for Herbert was continually interjecting during that answer, and he'll leave the chamber under 94A. He has order. Simply just can't have non-stop interjections in an answer. It's ridiculous. The member for Bowman has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Prime Minister. Julie from Macleay Island in my electorate has told me, quote, "I can't get past the expense of food and just how quickly the price of 2 bags of groceries has risen. I didn't feel so poor a few years ago, and I could save for items I needed for the house. Not now." This week, Albanese Labor government is taking our country in the wrong direction. How can Australian families and businesses possibly afford another 3 years of Labor?
Order. The Treasurer has warned. It's the same rules for everyone about interjecting before someone starts. Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his question. And I'm asked about 2 things, what we're doing this week, in the last week, but also about cost of living pressures, which we understand. Julie, along with a lot of Australians, are under financial pressure. We understand that. That's why we're acting. But what I hope you said to Julie when she raised it with you was that you voted against her getting, if she's from Queensland, from $1,000 between the federal government and the state government of Stephen Miles in energy bill support. I hope you said that you voted against it.
Order.
I hope you explain to Julie if she's
Order.
a
The Leader
worker
of the Nationals will cease
on
to
a
reject
low
it.
income that you opposed her getting a tax cut. You opposed it. Not only did you oppose it, you then said you'd reverse it, and then your leader said there should be an election on the basis of it. That's how hostile you were to tax cuts for Julie if she's a worker. If she's not a worker and she's on a payment, as the Minister for Social Services just outlined, we have supported increases that those opposite have also said are wasteful. I hope you have said, sorry that my side of politics thinks there is $315 billion of waste that we wouldn't have undertaken. I hope that you've explained to Julie, if she buys any medicines, that you wanted medicines to be more expensive rather than cheaper, because Julie might be one of the people who have benefited by $1 billion. By $1 billion. And I hope as well that the member has said that he's been opposed to and has voted against affordable housing. He's voted against. I don't know if Julie has kids, then you voted against childcare being cheaper. Those opposite have also voted against a pay rise for childcare workers, a pay rise for aged care workers, and you voted against, of course, free TAFE. Free TAFE. Free TAFE. And your deputy leader explained why you were opposed to free TAFE, because if things are free, apparently, according to the Liberal Party philosophy, they're not valued, which explains why you don't support Medicare and never have, why you don't support public schools, and why you continue to just say what you're against and not put anything forward constructively that will help.
Just remind the Prime Minister and all members to direct their remarks through the chair. I didn't want to interrupt the Prime Minister during his answer. The member for McEwen has the
call.
My
question is to the Minister for Communications. Why is it so important the Albanese Labor government's proposal to establish a minimum age for social media passes the Parliament this week?
Give the call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. The Albanese government takes seriously its obligation to online safety and the reduction of harms facing Australians. Now, we know that parents are rightly concerned about these harms as they impact on their children, and we've taken a decision to support them. We also want young people to imagine a world where social media does not have to constantly fuel their thoughts, drive their anxieties or determine their sense of fitting in. There are enough pressures already in the teenage years, and the Albanese government is taking a stand to say that access to social media does not have to define connection in this country. I say to Australia's young people that your voices are important, and we have been listening. One of the key features of our legislation is its implementation timeframe. We are committed to using this time to engage with young people and the organisations that represent them. And I thank the many young people for their engagement already and for outlining their concerns. And I say to them that we will work with you over the next 12 months and beyond to ensure wraparound supports for young people remain accessible.
The Minister for Communications, I don't know why the member for Fisher feels the need to just continually interject with this rolling commentary with every answer, but it's completely unacceptable, and he, more than anyone in the parliament, should know that. So he's warned. Since everyone wants to get a fair go here, you've got to treat everyone fairly as well. The Minister for Communication has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the importance of this bill, the legislation allows for rules to be made for definitional carve-outs for messaging and gaming. We want young people to remain connected to their family and friends and to be able to participate in digital environments that are age-appropriate. The rules will also allow for educational and health apps that function in a similar way to social media to remain available to connect with young people. The aim here is to drive innovation and digital connections in spaces that are designed for the needs of children, because their education, health and wellbeing are paramount for this government. Mr Speaker, this work is not constrained to the communications portfolio. We are working collaboratively across government, and I acknowledge the contributions of many colleagues, including the Attorney-General, the Ministers for Education, Health, Youth and Social Services, and the Assistant Minister for Mental Health. They have worked hard to consider policies that complement our bill and build support for young people where and when they need it. Collectively, we are continuing to ensure the views and perspectives of parents, young people and communities remain central to the policies we take forward to support them through the implementation phase and beyond. And allowing this time for the law to come into effect will strengthen how it operates in practical terms and enable us to continue working with young people and the sectors that represent them.
Give a call to the honourable member for Curtin.
This is a question for the Minister for Social Services. A crisis payment is meant to be available for women escaping domestic violence, but the conditions exclude half the women who apply. The payment is only available if a woman can show she fits the narrow criteria within 7 days of leaving. This is an unrealistic expectation for women whose lives are in chaos. Will the government review the conditions of the crisis payment so it actually helps women when they need it?
Call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Curtin for her question and her long-standing advocacy for women and children escaping family and domestic violence. We know that at a time when a woman is leaving a violent relationship, it is a very difficult time. And our government's made a number of changes and investments to try and support women at that particular time when they're leaving a violent relationship. We have brought in, for example, 10 days of family domestic violence leave to allow someone in that circumstance to attend to appointments, court or see police. We've also made permanent the Escaping Family Violence Payment, which is not administered by Services Australia, but by another non-government organisation that has the expertise, which provides people with $5,000 of support to set up a new home or to get things that they may need. In addition, there is the crisis payment, as the member has identified, which is another plank of support. Now, while legislation requires that that person has 7 days from the traumatic event to lodge a claim for crisis payment, there is flexibility to support people in this circumstance. Services Australia provides an additional 14 days after contact to lodge a claim if they've experienced family and domestic violence. Notwithstanding that, we know as a government too often perpetrators of family domestic violence can exploit and manipulate government systems to control, harass or threaten a current or former partner. And we have continued to look at government systems across the board through some of the work we're doing. Most recently, the officials undertaking this whole-of-government systems abuse review in the Commonwealth have met with their Lived Experience Advisory Council to talk with them about their interactions with the social security system, but also the Australian tax system and the child support system. So we will continue to look across government systems about how we best can support victim survivors of family and domestic violence, but it is not the only plank. We have a number of measures in place and we'll continue to look at more we can do. Thank you.
Call to the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government making medicines cheaper for all Australians, including new medicines being added to the PBS? How do cheaper medicines help strengthen Medicare after a decade of cuts and neglect?
Give a call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Werriwa for her question. She is such a strong supporter of our work to strengthen Medicare and make medicines cheaper. It's something we talk about constantly. And she knows that in just over 2 years, Mr Speaker, we've made more than 260 new or expanded listings onto the PBS, providing Australians with access to the world's best medicines at affordable PBS prices. And this month, we've expanded access to Evenity, a leading treatment for severe osteoporosis. Up until now, Evenity has only been available after a patient, usually an older woman, has suffered not one but 2 separate fractures. But now it will be available as a first-line treatment immediately after a diagnosis of severe osteoporosis. This is going to benefit more than 9,000 mainly older Australians every single year, Mr Speaker. And instead of those older Australians paying almost $5,000 for a course of treatment, it will be available at affordable PBS prices. And at the same time, we've been making those PBS prices cheaper, Mr Speaker. In the first 3 months of our time in government, we slashed the maximum amount that pensioners would pay each year for their medicines by 25%. Last year alone, that meant an additional 22 million free scripts for Australia's pensioners. 22 million, Mr Speaker. We also delivered the biggest cut to the price of medicines in the 75-year history of the PBS, and we finally allowed doctors to prescribe common long-term medicines for 60 days' supply, not just 30. And as the Prime Minister said earlier in question time, these measures have saved Australians more than $1 billion in co-payments at the pharmacy counter, making a real difference at a time of cost of living pressure, Mr Speaker. Now, we know Australian households are still doing it tough, and that's why we're also freezing the price of medicines next year by up to 5 years, which will save them another $500 million. But we also know that all of this progress on making medicines cheaper is under threat. Under threat from a Liberal Party that voted against the measures in the first place. Under threat from a shadow treasurer who continues to describe our investments in Medicare as wasteful. Lined up for the chopping block if the Treasurer ever got his way on this side of the House, God forbid, Mr Speaker, but also under threat from a Leader of the Opposition who, when he was Health Minister, only ever tried to push health prices up rather than down. Now, I said already we've saved patients, Mr Speaker, more than $1 billion at the pharmacy. In his first budget as Health Minister, the Leader of the Opposition actually tried to force medicine prices up that would have cost patients $1 billion more, not $1 billion less, Mr Speaker, proving yet again you can't trust this man and you can't trust the Liberal Party on Medicare.
The call to the Prime Minister.
On that note, Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Call to the Minister for Communications, who is seeking a personal explanation. Call to the Minister for Communications.
Mr Speaker, I wish to make a personal explanation.
Do you claim to be misrepresented?
Most grievously.
You may proceed.
This morning in the Sydney Morning Herald there is an editorial by Bevan Shields which says the following, and I quote, "TV and gambling executives met with Communications Minister Michelle Rowland in August." That is false.
Call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, who is also seeking a personal explanation.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave to make a personal explanation.
Do you claim to be misrepresented?
Yes.
You may proceed.
In question time today, I asked the Prime Minister about the more than 25,000 businesses in Australia that have gone insolvent since he became Prime Minister, with 1,364 going bust in the last month alone. In response, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "The facts are just wrong that the Deputy Leader has put forward," end quote. Speaker, the data I was quoting from is ASIC data. It is not my word or the Prime Minister's word. It is not Labor's word or the Liberals' word. It is ASIC data. It is not wrong. It is correct. The Prime Minister should now update the House at the first available opportunity to correct the mistake as standing orders prescribe. And to help the Prime Minister, I seek leave to table the ASIC data, which spells out the numbers for every quarter on record.
Leave granted.
It's available on the internet if it is what you said.
We shall move to papers and give the call to the Leader of the House.
Speaker, I present the status of government responses in the House of Representatives to parliamentary committee reports as at the 30th of September this year.